Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast. Today we are taking on a monumental task, a deep dive into the mind of one of the Scottish Enlightenment's most brilliant and maybe most dangerous philosophers, David Hume.
That's putting it mildly.
Our sources for this are some really profound excerpts from his huge work, An Enquiry Concerning Human Understanding. It's basically an intellectual anatomy of the human mind. And Hume's ambition here is just massive.
It is. He's challenging our most basic assumptions about what knowledge even is, what belief is, and ultimately what the true limits of our own reason are.
Exactly. So what we're trying to do here is find a shortcut, really, to understanding his earth-shattering insights. We want to give you those immediate aha moments about how your own mind actually works.
And that's our mission, right? We're going to systematically break down Hume's taxonomy of mental life, his very strict division between what we feel and what we think. And from there, we're going to follow him down the rabbit hole.
The ultimate rabbit hole.
The ultimate rabbit hole. His skeptical assault on the very bedrock of science, the idea of causality. We're going to explore how he just stripped away all the metaphysical fluff and redefined these huge concepts like necessity and power as really nothing more than habits of the mind.
It's all about uncovering the astonishing and, frankly, humbling principles that actually regulate our understanding. And we'll get to his really controversial arguments about belief, testimony, and why it's so difficult, maybe even impossible, to logically prove a miracle.
That's going to be quite a journey.
Okay, so before we start dissecting the mind itself, let's just set the stage a little. Who was David Hume? We're talking about a figure who lived from 1711 to 1776, a real titan of the Scottish Enlightenment.
And he wasn't just a philosopher, which is key. He was a polymath, an influential economist, a respected historian. Philosophically, he's firmly in the camp of empiricism.
Sometimes called sensualism, right?
Exactly. The doctrine that all of our knowledge has to originate somehow in sensory experience.
And you really can't overstate his influence. His skeptical, what he called a metaphysics-free approach, it was like a philosophical earthquake.
It was. It famously woke Immanuel Kant from his dogmatic slumber, as Kant himself put it. And that pushed Kant to write the Critique of the Pure Reason. In so many ways, Hume's insistence on grounding everything in experience was a forerunner for modern movements like positivism and analytical philosophy. He was trying to sweep away centuries of, abstract speculation that wasn't grounded in anything real.
It's interesting, too, that he wasn't just some academic shut away in a tower. Our sources show he was active in early economic thought, pre-classical economics, and was a big advocate for free trade.
Oh, absolutely. He was deeply engaged with the world, and that engagement was personal. He had this close intellectual friendship with Adam Smith,
The author of The Wealth of Nations.
the very same. They were constantly debating morality, economics. It just shows how connected Hume was to the practical issues of his time. But for all his brilliance, his own personal journey was, it was pretty tough at the start.
Yeah, that part of his story is often overlooked, but it feels really relevant to the kind of philosopher he became.
I think so. He was born in Edinburgh in 1711, the younger son of a pretty poor noble family, so he had a very small inheritance to work with. And he pushed himself so hard in his studies that he basically had a breakdown.
It's a physical one.
A physical one. The sources mention things like scurvy, excessive salivation. He was in a state of profound inner dissatisfaction, and it forced him to completely change his intense lifestyle, which, ironically, probably helped ground him in the world of immediate experience he would later write about, though we're told it also contributed to a lifelong struggle with his weight.
And then his first attempt to publish his masterpiece, it was met with complete silence. That must have been just devastating.
Oh, it was famously bad. He wrote his first major work, A Treatise of Human Nature, during a 2-year stay in La Flèche, France, which is a nice historical footnote because that's where René Descartes had gone to school.
And the book was revolutionary,
But nobody cared. Hume himself said it fell as a stillbirth from the press. Just total silence from the learned world.
So if that first attempt was such a failure, what was his ultimate goal? What kept him going, reformulating these ideas into the Enquiry?
His core aim never wavered, to create a comprehensive science of man. He saw that previous philosophers tried to define human nature based on these, eternal, abstract, often religious truths. Hume wanted to approach it like a natural scientist.
Like Newton, but for the mind.
Exactly like Newton for the mind. He wanted to find the principles, the regular mechanical rules that actually govern our understanding, our passions, our morals. He believed if he could find those foundational mechanisms, he could bring stability and accuracy to fields like politics and law, a true science of human nature.
Okay, let's unpack that scientific approach. If you're going to build a science of man, you need the basic building blocks, the atoms of the mind, so to speak. And Hume's approach here is radical. He starts with a very simple, very strict division of everything that goes on in our heads.
That's the starting point for his entire system, a simple yet crucial division.
So what is the actual tangible difference between what we sense right now and what we're just thinking about?
He bases the distinction purely on their strength and their liveliness, or, as he puts it, their force and vivacity. He takes all the stuff of the mind, which he just calls perceptions, and he splits them into two kinds.
The first being the raw, intense, immediate data.
Exactly. He calls these impressions. These are the strong, lively, immediate perceptions. It's all our sensory data, what you're hearing, seeing, tasting right now, but also our powerful immediate emotions, loving something, desiring something, feeling anger.
He lumps sensations and emotions together.
He does because they share that quality of being present, vivid, and forceful. They hit you.
And the second category is everything else, the echoes.
The echoes, that's a perfect way to put it. He calls them ideas. These are basically our thoughts, our concepts, our mental images. They are the less forcible, less lively perceptions. They're what happen when you're remembering a past sensation or reflecting on a feeling you had yesterday or just daydreaming. They are, in essence, faded simulations of the original vivid impressions.
And this simple distinction leads directly to one of his most powerful and really restrictive arguments, the copy principle. We feel like our thoughts are totally free, right? We can imagine flying, we can invent monsters, we can transport ourselves to the other side of the universe. But Hume says no.
He says our creative power is actually severely limited. He argues that no matter how wild your imagination seems, it's really only doing a few simple things. Compounding things you've already experienced, transposing them, or augmenting and diminishing their qualities.
So the classic example of the golden mountain.
Right. You haven't invented a new, simple idea. You've just taken two prior impressions. The idea of gold from one experience, the idea of a mountain from another, and you've just stuck them together in your mind. You can't, according to Hume, create a truly new, simple idea that you haven't sensed before.
That really challenges our whole notion of creativity. It makes an artist sound more like a DJ, just remixing pre-existing sensory tracks.
That's exactly the implication, and he applies this to the most abstract and sublime concepts, too. Things like God or infinite space.
How does that work for the idea of God?
Well, he says our idea of God as an infinitely intelligent, wise, and good being is formed by us reflecting on the operations of our own minds, our own limited wisdom, our own finite goodness, and then just augmenting those qualities without limit. We just scale them up to infinity. We can't actually conceive of a totally different kind of mind. We can only take what we've experienced internally and amplify it.
So if I tried to imagine a sixth sense, something I've never experienced, Hume would argue I'm just. What, combining aspects of sight and sound and touch?
He'd say that's all you can do. You can try, but if you analyze the new concept, you'll find it just breaks down into components that came from your existing five senses. And he supports this copy principle with two really strong empirical arguments. They're almost like little experiments you can run on your own mind.
Okay, let's take the first one, the argument from analysis.
The argument from analysis is basically a challenge. Hume says, take any complex or abstract idea you have, and if you carefully analyze it, it will always break down into simpler ideas. And those simple ideas will, in turn, always be copies of some original impression, some prior feeling or sensation. He basically dares anyone to produce a simple idea that didn't come from a prior impression. He's confident they'll fail.
The second argument is the argument from deficiency. This one is more about what happens when the sensory input is missing in the first place.
This is maybe the more compelling physical evidence. If someone has a defect in a sensory organ, say they're blind from birth or have been deaf their whole life, the sad consequence is a permanent lack of the corresponding ideas. Ideas of color or sound just don't exist in that person's mind. And he says this is mirrored in our emotional and moral lives, too.
How does that parallel work? A lack of emotional experience being like a missing sense organ.
Well, think about a really complex emotional state. Hume says a person of mild manners, someone who has never felt intense, violent passion, can't truly form an idea of something like inveterate revenge. They might know the words, but they don't have the genuine internal impression, the feeling, that gives the idea its meaning.
It's like the example in the sources.
Exactly. A Laplander who's never left his home has no true notion of the relish of wine. They can combine the ideas of pleasant and drink, but they're missing that specific, subtle impression of the actual taste. The idea is completely dependent on having the actual feeling or sensation first.
Which means our knowledge is limited not by our reason, but by the boundaries of our own life experiences. That's a very humbling thought.
It is. The raw data for our knowledge is finite. It's confined by what our senses give us. But Hume recognizes the mind isn't just a static library of these faded copies. He notes that even in our wildest and most wandering reveries, even in dreams, our thoughts aren't pure chaos.
There's some kind of connection, even when it feels random.
Exactly. There's a connection upheld among the succeeding ideas. This regularity proves that our thoughts are bound by certain universal principles of association. There are forces that pull ideas together, ensuring that even our most random-seeming thoughts are still tethered to some kind of system.
Okay, so this is where the structure he's just built, this world of impressions and ideas, becomes the tool he uses to just dismantle traditional philosophy. He's forcing us to reevaluate what we can even call knowledge.
This is the really revolutionary part.
He challenges the very idea that reason can determine what's going to happen next. And to frame this, he famously divides all objects of human thought into two types.
That's right. The first category is relations of ideas. This is the world of demonstrative sciences. Geometry, algebra, arithmetic. These are things that are intuitively or logically certain. The key here is that the contrary of a relation of ideas implies a flat-out contradiction.
Like saying a square has 5 sides.
Precisely. Or 3 times 5 is not half of 30. It's false, simply by definition. It's logically impossible.
So certainty is possible, but only within these closed systems like math. What about the second category, the one that governs the real world?
That's matters of fact, and these are based entirely on experience. And the critical point is that the contrary of every matter of fact is always possible, it's always conceivable, and it never implies a logical contradiction.
So the famous example.
The sun will not rise tomorrow. That proposition is no less intelligible, and it implies no more of a logical contradiction than the statement that it will rise. It would violate all of our experience, for sure, but it wouldn't violate the laws of pure logic.
And that immediately puts a huge limit on the power of reason. If all our thinking about the real world depends on experience, then it has to be founded on the one thing that lets us go beyond what we're seeing right now, the relationship of cause and effect.
Everything depends on it. You see a flash of lightning, you infer that thunder is coming. The entire way we interact with the world is built on this. But then Hume asks this absolutely devastating question. What can we really know about cause and effect a priori, before we've had any experience of the world?
You'd think if you just examined an object carefully enough, with pure reason, you could figure out what it would do.
That's the assumption he just destroys. His finding is this. If an object is totally new to you, you cannot discover its causes or its effects just by examining its sensible qualities, no matter how accurate you are. The cause and the effect are two totally distinct, separate events.
There's nothing in the cause that logically points to the effect.
Nothing at all. Take his famous billiard balls. If Adam, the first man with perfect rational faculties, saw one billiard ball rolling towards another, he couldn't, through reason alone, infer that the second ball must move. He could imagine 100 different outcomes.
They could just stop. The first ball could jump over the second one.
They could both vanish. Nothing about the sight of the cause logically necessitates the effect. It's the same with the properties of water. Adam couldn't have inferred from the clearness and fluidity of water that it would suffocate him. The connection, the power that links cause and effect, is simply invisible to reason. We only see one event following another.
So that search for the ultimate power, the hidden force, is useless.
Utterly fruitless. Hume says the search for ultimate causes in nature always ends with us just recognizing human blindness and weakness. The best science we can do only staves off our ignorance a little longer. We explain one thing by pointing to a more general force, but that force is still itself unexplained.
And this leads us to the core of his skeptical argument, the inductive problem. If all our reasoning about the world relies on cause and effect, and we only learn about that through experience, what is the foundation for our belief that the future will be like the past?
That's a killer question.
What's the logical step that takes us from, I've seen A followed by B 1,000 times, to, I conclude that the next time I see A, B will follow?
And this is Hume's big reveal. That step, that mediation, is not reason. It can't be. There is no logical process that can bridge that gap. If you try to logically prove that the future must resemble the past, your argument just becomes circular. You end up assuming the very thing you're trying to prove. The connection isn't intuitive, it isn't logical, so it can't be based on reason.
So if predictability of the universe isn't guaranteed by logic, what is it that compels us instantly and automatically to expect the future to be like the past?
His answer is groundbreaking, and it's psychological, not logical. It's custom or habit. That's it. This is the only principle that makes us expect bread to nourish us tomorrow just because it did yesterday. It's a propensity to renew the same act, an expectation of the familiar, and it's driven not by thinking, but by the sheer effect of repetition.
That seems to strip science of its rational dignity. It replaces it with a kind of psychological twitch.
It does. But Hume would say it's a necessary one. He points out that this hypothesis of custom explains something that reason can't. Why do we draw an inference from 1,000 instances, but not from just one?
Right. If it were a matter of logic, one instance should be enough to prove the connection.
Exactly. Logic is invariable. But no person, after seeing one billiard ball move another just once, can rationally prove that it will always happen that way. It's experience that has to gradually build up the habit, the mental mechanism that translates frequency into expectation.
So custom isn't just a mental quirk, it's the engine that allows us to function.
He calls it the great guide of human life. It's an instinct, a mechanical tendency that nature has implanted in us to make sure our knowledge can extend beyond our immediate memory and senses. Without it, we'd be totally paralyzed, unable to act, unable to survive. Nature, Hume says, decided the matter was too important to be left to the slow, clunky, fallible process of human reason. So since custom is what drives this expectation, we have to figure out what that expectation actually is. What's the difference between a real belief like you believe a hot stove will burn you and just a fantasy like imagining you can fly?
Okay, if the difference isn't the logical content of the idea, it has to be something about the mental state itself. We're back to impressions and ideas.
We are. Hume concludes that belief isn't about the content of an idea, it's a sentiment. It's a particular manner of conception. It's the feeling that distinguishes a factual certainty from a mere fiction of the imagination. When you believe something, the idea just feels different.
What does that feeling actually do to the idea?
It gives it more force, more vigor, more vivacity. A belief is a more robust, solid idea that has more influence on our passions. And this force gets transmitted to an idea when a present impression is there to trigger it. You see smoke, that's the impression, and custom instantly directs your thought to the idea of fire, making that idea of fire more lively and forceful than if you had just randomly thought of it.
Before we dig deeper into where some of our most mysterious concepts come from, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this deep dive.
All right, so this same rigorous method now forces Hume to turn his focus inward, to apply that copy principle to the most obscure ideas in all of philosophy, the ideas of power, force, or necessary connection. If every single idea has to come from an original, vivid impression, where on earth does the idea of power come from?
That is a huge question. We use that word constantly. The power of gravity, the power of an engine, the power of will. Where is the actual impression of power?
Well, we can look in two places. First, we can look at external objects. When we see the two billiard balls collide, do we actually see the power transferring from one to the other? Hume says no. We never, in any single instance, discover any actual power or connection that binds them. We only see the conjunction. One event follows another. The events themselves seem entirely loose and separate.
The force isn't a quality you can see, like color or shape.
Not at all. So if we can't find it out there in the world, philosophers often turn inward, to the mind. Surely we feel the power of our own will, right? I decide to raise my arm and it raises. That feels like a direct experience of power.
But Hume says no.
He says even this internal reflection is just as mysterious. We experience the fact that our limbs follow the commands of our will. That's a common experience. But the power or energy that makes that happen is completely unknown and inconceivable to us.
But why? It feels like I'm in control.
Because we aren't conscious of the secret mechanism that unites the mind and the body. We have no idea how the intention in our mind gets translated through nerves and muscles and cells into the final motion of our finger. We only know the start of the chain and the end of the chain. The link between them is known only through experience, not through any understanding of the power itself.
And our control isn't even absolute, which suggests the power isn't really inherent to the will.
That's another great point he makes. Our command over our own bodies and thoughts varies wildly. You have more mental control in the morning than you do when you're exhausted at night. Sickness can rob you of control over your limbs. If the power were really known to us, it shouldn't fluctuate like that. We're simply ignorant of the mechanism.
And this widespread ignorance about where power comes from, both externally and internally, led some of his contemporaries to a really radical conclusion called occasionalism.
Yes, occasionalism was a very clever way out for people who agreed with Hume that matter itself doesn't have any inherent power. They said, okay, since matter can't operate on its own, the only true power must be in God. So the deity must be the immediate and sole cause of every single thing that happens.
So when one billiard ball hits another, it's not the first ball causing the motion.
It's God at that exact moment willing the second ball to move. Every sensation you have, every time you move your arm, it's a specific act of God's will, seconding your own human will.
That sounds like a very tidy system. It preserves the idea of power by just moving it to the ultimate source. So why did Hume reject it?
He just found it too bold to be convincing. He said these philosophers had got into fairyland with conclusions that were just too extraordinary and disconnected from common life. His argument is that we are just as ignorant how a supreme mind operates as we are of how a rock operates. The same skepticism that makes us deny power in a stone should make us equally skeptical about understanding the power mechanism in God. It's just explaining one mystery by appealing to an even bigger one.
So, if we can't find an impression of this connection, and we have to reject these grand metaphysical explanations, what are we left with? Just what we observe and what we feel psychologically.
That's the only logical place to land. And it leads to Hume's famous purely functional definitions of a cause. Since all we ever observe is a sequence of events and the resulting customary inference in our own minds, a cause isn't some metaphysical glue, it's just a functional relationship. And he gives two definitions.
The first one focuses on the external observable pattern.
Right, a cause is an object followed by another, and where all the objects similar to the first are followed by objects similar to the second, it's a definition based purely on reliable external repetition, constant conjunction.
And the second definition focuses on the internal psychological experience.
A cause is also an object whose appearance conveys the mind by customary transition to the idea of the other. This one is all about the internal customary inference. The key move here is that he's taken the concept of necessity out of the external world and placed it firmly inside the subjective, habitual workings of the human mind.
So this purely descriptive definition of necessity, constant conjunction plus mental inference, has huge radical implications when he applies it beyond physics to the world of human beings. The staggering conclusion is that human free will and human action have to fall into the very same descriptive law.
This is where he directly takes on traditional moral philosophy. He argues that, in practice, everybody has always believed in this doctrine of necessity, even if they deny it in words when they're talking about free will. Our entire understanding of history, politics, and daily life depends on an assumed uniformity in human motives and actions.
How do we see that uniformity in just, day-to-day life?
We rely on it every second. When you read history, you assume that the ancient Greeks had similar motivations to modern people. You assume that similar motives generally produce similar actions. That's what allows you to make sense of the past.
And it's essential for society to work.
Absolutely. A factory owner counts on the diligence of his workers to get a job done just as much as he counts on his tools not to break. A politician relies on laws having a uniform influence on people to maintain order. This inference about how other people will act is so fundamental to human life that we're all doing it all the time without even thinking about it. Human actions show a constant conjunction with motives and circumstances, just like matter shows a constant conjunction with force.
But hold on, that seems to break down pretty quickly when you see someone act irrationally or completely out of character. We see so much irregularity and chaos in human behavior that we just don't see in, say, the orbits of the planets.
And Hume has an answer for that. He addresses this apparent irregularity by making an analogy to mechanical failures. The philosophical observer, he says, assumes that the underlying principles are still operating uniformly. The irregularity is only on the surface.
What's the analogy he uses?
The clock. A peasant sees a clock stop and just says, well, it stopped. But a skilled clockmaker knows that the spring is still exerting the same force on the wheels. The failure must be due to some hidden, tiny cause, maybe a grain of dust that's blocking the mechanism. The underlying laws haven't changed.
So the same applies to people.
The same applies to people. A physician knows the human body is an incredibly complicated machine. A sudden fever isn't proof that the laws of biology are suspended. It's just proof that the machine is too complex for us to see all the hidden parts. In the same way, when someone acts out of character, it must be due to some secret opposition of contrary motives that we just can't see. The necessity is still there, operating uniformly. We just can't perceive it fully.
What's fascinating is that this reframing of necessity as just descriptive regularity is actually crucial for the concept we usually oppose to it: moral responsibility. How does necessity make morality possible for Hume?
It's a really brilliant piece of logic. Moral responsibility requires necessity. If there were no necessity, if there was no constant, uniform link between a person's motives and their actions, then actions would be completely random. They would just happen. They wouldn't be proofs of any underlying stable character, whether it's criminal or virtuous.
So if an action is just random, it doesn't say anything about the person who did it.
Exactly. Laws and morality only work because we assume that rewards and punishments can have a regular, uniform influence, that they can act as causes on people's motives. We judge an action as criminal because we see it as proof of a stable criminal principle in the mind, like malice. If there were no necessary link between the motive and the action wouldn't prove anything about character, and so you couldn't justly punish or praise it.
So the whole philosophical argument against determinism, based on some mysterious internal freedom, is, for Hume, just a big misunderstanding of what the word necessity even means.
He concludes it's a merely verbal dispute. People resist the idea of necessity for the will because they mistakenly think it means some kind of metaphysical coercive force like chains on the mind. But since Hume's definition is just based on observable regularity, constant conjunction and inference, and since we see that regularity everywhere in human behavior, there should be no problem applying the term to the will. It doesn't undermine morality. In fact, it's the very foundation of it.
Okay, so having built this incredibly rigorous standard for evidence based entirely on uniform experience and habit, Hume now applies this razor-sharp tool to the most extraordinary claims of all, the ones that rely almost entirely on testimony: religious miracles.
And he starts by laying down the fundamental rule for any rational belief, the principle of proportionality.
What does that mean exactly?
A wise man, he says, always proportions his belief to the evidence. You have to look at the balance of opposite experiments. A proof is what you have when the evidence is based on totally uniform, infallible experience where you've never seen a single exception. Probability, on the other hand, is when you have more observations on one side than the other. So the wise man weighs the two sides, subtracts the smaller number from the larger, and that gives him the precise degree of his belief.
And testimony reports from witnesses is just another matter of fact that's subject to the same calculation. It's not some special kind of truth.
Not at all. We believe witnesses only because our past experience has shown us that generally people tend to tell the truth and that memory is fairly reliable. The evidence from testimony, therefore, gets stronger or weaker depending on our experience with it. If we have experience that a certain kind of report is often wrong, we diminish its authority.
And this sets up his incredibly powerful argument against miracles. First, how does he define a miracle?
Very precisely. A miracle is a violation of the laws of nature. And the laws of nature are, by definition, established by that uniform experience we just talked about, which constitutes an absolute proof.
So, if a law of nature is a proof,
then there is a direct and full proof against every single miraculous event that could ever be claimed. Before you even hear the testimony, you have the strongest possible evidence working against it.
so it becomes a subtraction problem, a battle of evidence.
A battle that the miracle can never win. You have the testimony supporting the miracle on one side, which is at best a probability since people can be foolish or dishonest. And on the other side, you have the strongest possible evidence, the uniform, unchanging law of nature, which is a proof. The two are in direct opposition. You have to subtract the weaker force from the stronger one. The inevitable result is, at the very least, overwhelming doubt, if not the complete annihilation of belief in the miracle.
So the stark conclusion is, why would you ever believe the testimony?
You shouldn't rationally. It is always universally more miraculous that the laws of nature should be violated than that human testimony should be false. The knavery and folly of men are such common, well-experienced phenomena that we should always prefer to believe that an extraordinary story comes from human error or deception, rather than admitting such a massive violation of everything we know about how the world works. You're choosing the lesser miracle, that people can be wrong, over the greater miracle, that the universe stopped working.
And beyond this basic calculation, Hume adds that, historically, the actual evidence for miracles is usually incredibly weak anyway. He gives 4 reasons why we should be skeptical of testimony about prodigies.
Right. First, there's just a lack of credible witnesses. He says you rarely find miracles attested by a sufficient number of people with unquestioned good sense, education, and integrity, people with a lot to lose if they're caught in a lie.
Second is the psychology of the audience.
Exactly. Humans have a powerful natural propensity to the marvelous. We love stories of wonder and surprise. This emotional pull, he says, taints the objectivity of both the reporting and the belief.
Third is where these stories tend to pop up.
Miracles, he notes, mostly abound among ignorant and barbarous nations. When they are found in civilized societies, they're usually just hand-me-downs from those ignorant ancestors. As societies become more enlightened and critical, the miracle claims tend to fade away.
And the fourth factor is maybe the most clever, because it uses the religions against each other.
It is. He says the testimony for any one miracle in one religion is opposed by the testimony for all the miracles in every rival religion. If you have a miracle story supporting Christianity, its credibility is undermined by all the miracle stories supporting Islam or ancient paganism. Since they all claim to prove a unique truth, the testimony for each one effectively cancels out the testimony for all the others.
He even uses some really striking historical examples to make this concrete.
He does. He points to what he calls one of the best attested miracles in all profane history, the story reported by the historian Tacitus about the Emperor Vespasian curing a blind man and a lame man. The evidence was seemingly perfect: a respected emperor, public event, witnesses who stood by the story for years. And yet, Hume says, we all know it was a gross and palpable falsehood. It just shows that even the strongest human evidence isn't enough to overturn a law of nature.
And he even uses an example from his own time, the Jansenist miracles at Abbé Paris's tomb.
Right, these were happening in 18th century Paris. They were attested by witnesses of credit and distinction in a learned age in front of judges. They were so public that even their enemies couldn't directly refute them. But Hume says what successfully refutes this cloud of witnesses is simply the absolute impossibility or miraculous nature of the events themselves. The greater miracle, the suspension of physics, always wins.
So if rational belief is off the table, what is left?
He concludes that assent to religion, given this huge conflict of evidence, has to be based on faith. And he defines that faith as a continued miracle in his own person, because it requires a person to subvert all the normal principles of their own understanding and to believe what is most contrary to custom and experience. In Hume's view, that act of pure faith is necessary precisely because reason and evidence make belief in the miraculous impossible.
So after this journey through Hume's anatomy of the mind, which has reduced our knowledge to sensation and our certainty to habit, it seems like we're headed for a kind of profound doubt. But that's not his final destination, is it? He's not arguing for total, paralyzing uncertainty.
Not at all. He recognizes that if you try to push skepticism to an absolute extreme, what he calls Pyrrhonian extremism, it's just unstable. It's useless. The moment the philosopher leaves his study and steps out into the real world, the urgencies of life, our passions, the need to act, all of it will dissipate those extreme skeptical conclusions. Nature will always assert her rights and force us to believe and act. That kind of pure skepticism can't survive outside the library.
So out of that radical doubt, a more useful and durable kind of philosophy has to emerge. Mitigated skepticism. What does that look like in practice?
It's basically about fostering intellectual humility. A mitigated skepticism encourages modesty and caution. It's meant to make dogmatic people, the ones who are absolutely certain about unprovable things, aware of the strange infirmities of human understanding. But most importantly, it dictates a strict, pragmatic limit on what we should even bother inquiring about. We should only focus on subjects that our limited faculties can actually handle.
And this limitation basically defines the proper scope of all human thought. What are the 2 realms that our custom-driven minds can actually deal with?
First, there's abstract science or demonstration. This is limited exclusively to quantity and number, so mathematics and algebra. In this realm, things are demonstrably certain because their opposite is a logical contradiction. And Hume warns that any attempt to extend this kind of perfect knowledge beyond these bounds, like trying to rationally prove metaphysical claims about the origin of the universe, is just sophistry.
And the second realm, which covers everything else in the real world.
That's moral reasoning, which for him means anything concerning matters of fact. This is history, politics, physics, chemistry. These subjects are founded entirely on cause and effect, which we only learn about from experience. We can't explain why fire burns, but experience teaches us that it burns, and that's enough for us to survive and build technology.
So the final instruction from this mitigated skepticism is to just reject anything that tries to go beyond those two verifiable domains.
Precisely. We have to rigorously give up on these speculative questions about the origin of worlds or the ultimate causes of things. His point is, look, if we can't even give a fully satisfactory rational reason why we believe a stone will fall after 1,000 experiments, how can we possibly satisfy ourselves about these huge questions concerning eternity or infinite space? Philosophical modesty means sticking to what's verifiable by either math or constant shared experience. In the end, David Hume's work is like a definitive, unromantic, anatomical map of our own understanding. It reveals that our most fundamental certainty about the world, the predictability that allows us to live our lives, isn't rooted in some flawless abstract rationality. It's rooted in custom, a powerful, useful instinct that nature gave us for our own survival.
So let's try to boil this all down. Here is the essential takeaway summary of Hume's revolutionary insights for you to carry forward. First, all of our thinking, all of our ideas are ultimately derived from and limited by our immediate strong sensations, our impressions. You literally cannot conceive of something you haven't in some way experienced.
Second, all of our reasoning about the real world depends entirely on the unproven psychological leap of custom or habit, not pure reason. We believe the future will be like the past simply because we are built that way.
Third, those big mysterious words, necessity and cause, are purely descriptive. They just mean we've observed a constant conjunction of events and our mind has formed a habit of inferring one from the other. There's no hidden metaphysical power holding the world together.
Fourth, the probability against a miracle, a violation of a law of nature, will always be greater than the credibility of any human testimony that supports it. Rationally, you should always bet on the law of nature.
And finally, fifth, true philosophical wisdom is found in a mitigated skepticism. We have to confine our inquiries to subjects we can actually verify, either through mathematical demonstration or through constant shared experience.
And just to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on, something that builds on all this. Since Hume has shown us that our entire knowledge of cause and effect is limited to our experience and is driven only by the habit of seeing things repeat, how certain can we ever truly be that the uniform laws of nature we rely on today, like gravity or thermodynamics, will actually hold true tomorrow? If custom is the only foundation, just how fragile is the whole scientific world?
That is a very challenging question to end on. It suggests our certainty is more a product of our psychology than any cosmic guarantee. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the revolutionary philosophy of David Hume. We hope you feel significantly more well-informed about the surprising mechanisms that govern your own thoughts. Until next time.